It's time for Recruiting Better with me, Ben Browning. For ambitious recruiters, it's never been tougher to get seen as a trusted advisor and true partner to your clients and candidates. Join me each week as I address your challenges head on, answering questions from recruitment consultants and business leaders, and introducing experts you can learn from whether you're looking to scale your billings or your business. So if you're looking for inspiration or insights to help you make more placements, win more new business, find more candidates, or simply replace long hours with smart moves, then stay tuned. Recruiting Better has got you covered.
So Rich, welcome to Recruiting Better. It's great to have you on the show, and I'm really glad that you were able to carve out some time to join us. We are going to spend some time today having a conversation around the things that recruiters can do to get better at sales. And as an expert in sales development and coaching, be really interested to pick your brains and get your thoughts. So I wanted to ask you a bit of a leading question to start with. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about what you think recruiters in particular can learn about sales processes from real salespeople.
Well, you use the phrase "real salespeople" there. It's interesting because I've had my fair share of conversations with recruitment agencies over my time over the past few years, whilst trying to sell my product to recruitment agencies. And one thing I've heard quite frequently is that they don't like to call themselves sales. They don't think of themselves in the world of sales. They talk about that, hey, what we do is a bit different to what you would think of as sales. But I just think that's all nonsense, quite frankly. I think ultimately you're in a business of transacting a product or service for money. You're in sales. It doesn't matter if that's a car, people, software, suites. It's all you're in sales. And I think to try and describe yourself as not being in sales is a little bit of a disservice to the industry and the profession. So I think the first thing of what can recruiters learn from real salespeople? Well, first of all, I'd say that if you're in recruitment, you are a real salesperson. But if you don't think of yourself as that you are one, then I think start to see that sales, despite it being a bit of a dirty word over the past for many years, I do believe that it's on a trajectory of being a very well-respected profession now. And I think that comes with how we treat it as a profession, the way that we act as professionals. I think that's my first point is just see it as a good profession to be in. I think secondly is that, again, I don't want to tarnish an entire industry with the same brushstroke here, but I do feel like one of the big differences I see in recruitment companies versus other companies that I sell to is that they have a mentality of selling is just a concept of having friendly conversations with people that you've built up great relationships with, and the people buy from you because they like you as a person and they get on with you and they enjoy going out for drinks with you. And whilst to some degree that has some merit, I'd say that likability in sales is highly overrated. I've lost count of the number of deals that I've lost where the prospect at the end of it said, "You know what, Rich, I actually like you more than I did the competitor who, quite frankly, I didn't actually enjoy my conversations with them, but ultimately they bought my competitor's product because they felt it was the right product for them as a business." People don't buy just because they like you anymore. They feel like the product or the service that you're offering is the best fit, and it's your job as a salesperson to essentially help that prospect figure out that you are the right fit for them or you're the wrong fit for them. So yeah, I'll start with that.
Got it. I love that. I know there's loads to unpack there, and I think that's a really good frame for how we're going to think about this conversation today, because you say a couple of things that I really buy into. Recruiters do use sales skills, whether or not they consider themselves to be salespeople, but the world of professional sales has gone through an absolute explosion recently, right? It feels that absolute, the sales methodologies, the amount of money that is spent in the sales industry, the way that sales is viewed and thought of, particularly by, those are the real heads of big corporations. It's very different these days, or at least, wildly shifting. And that asks recruiters to do a few things, doesn't it? I mean, you've seen this, as you say, both as a client and as somebody who listens to and analyzes and understands the structure of a kind of a sales conversation. But you talk about the idea of rapport being something that less well-developed sales processes prize, and perhaps in the world of professional sales has less value. So what maybe can you share with us that are perhaps other mistakes that in listening to calls or analyzing kind of the way that sellers sell, what are the other pitfalls or problems that people get themselves into when they approach sales conversations?
Well, yeah, you're right. I've probably, I'm going to hedge my bets here and say anybody listening to this, I've probably listened to far more sales conversations anybody listening to this podcast has done over the past few years. And I have the benefit of, using technology to help me with that process. And the mistakes and the things that I see top sellers do differently to those less successful, those have changed over the years. I'd say there are some common ones. The first one is that I say is really key is salespeople who don't truly actively listen in conversations with prospects. We all hear this phrase of, in sales, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that order. And what does that really mean? Because I think actually a lot of people hear that, yes, you've got to be a good listener in sales, but I think people think, when they think of what does a good listener mean, it's like you sit in silence and you kind of listen intently to what your prospect's saying. That is listening, but it's not what I would call active listening. Active listening is really hearing what's being said and actually asking questions or clarifying based on what you're hearing and maybe what you're not hearing that is being hinted at. So I'll give you a good example of that, Ben. Most, let's imagine I'm in the world of recruitment, which I'm not, but I've been sold to by a number of recruiters over the years. And they'll say something like, "Hey, Rich, so what are you looking for as a great candidate for your team?" And I could say something like, "Well, what I'm looking for is, someone who's, got a real hunger for the role." And then what will normally happen is that the recruiter will say, "Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, hear that a lot. Absolutely, we can find some good hungry candidates for you." And they'll go on to their next question. Now, what has a real hunger mean? Well, actually, that could mean a number of different things to a number of different people. My version of hungry could mean something very different to the next VP of sales that's, down the road. And the best salespeople hear the word looking for someone with a real hunger, and they're thinking, Rich, when you say real hunger, that can mean different things to different people. I want to make sure I've got a good understanding of what it means in your world. Can you expand upon that? Or it could be, "Hey, Rich, it sounds like, forgive me if I'm wrong, but you're looking for that. It suggests that maybe that's been missing in previous candidates that you've hired." This is the big difference between good salespeople and those who aren't successful. And it comes down to active listening, is trying to really unpack what is actually being said, not just taking the first thing that comes out of your prospects. The first answer is like gospel. And so, yeah, I'll maybe pause that if you want to ask any questions on that specifically, Ben. There are other things that spring to mind, but I'd say that is one common thing that I see the best people do.
Well, it'd be really remiss of me if I didn't have a good active listening based question off the back of it.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely. So thank you for opening the opportunity for me to make myself look foolish up the right there. But look, I know I hear you, and I don't know. It sounds as though what you're saying is that there's more about listening to the sentiment, listening to why people have given you that answer, rather than giving you that answer itself. Obviously, that's difficult, right? Reading between the lines. Is it something that just comes with experience? Are there any ways that recruiters can kind of shortcut that skill set?
I personally don't think there's necessarily shortcuts, so to speak, but what I'm sharing there is it's not like an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for someone to suddenly just develop the skill. It takes practice, right? It takes practice to get to that stage where you can believe that you're a truly good active listener. And it also involves listening back to what you actually do in sales conversations to identify, hey, actually, I've missed an opportunity here, and here, where I could have gone deeper. I could have asked a question. Because if you're not listening back and essentially replaying back what you're doing, you're forever kind of blind or ignorant, so to speak, as to the mistakes that you may be making every single day, which is impacting on your chances of success and revenue. Because I used to make these same mistakes. If I go back 10 years ago, I would describe myself as a bang average salesperson, quite frankly. And I have, it's not until I started like actually reflecting back on what I was doing, what my colleagues were doing, and identifying these areas of improvement that I was able to put them right. It's the first step to change is acknowledging there's a problem, right? And unless you're actually replaying what you're doing in calls, I guarantee that if you're not doing this, you're actually totally oblivious as to all the things that you are missing in calls, and you don't realize the things that you're seeing that's maybe impacting on your success. So I'd say that it's not a shortcut, but it's also not a difficult gap to bridge.
Yeah, I hear you. And I hear this from recruiters all the time, right? I'm a really big advocate, as you know, for listening back to call recordings and understanding what we're doing and building out our process. And actually, we'll come on to talking about process a little bit later as well, because I know that's something that you are a big advocate for in terms of having the clarity around that. And I wonder, in terms of analyzing calls, whether there's a process or a system or a way that you think about call analysis in order to get the best out of it.
So the process for me starts with a commitment to like wanting to do this on a regular basis. It's like anything in life, right? If you want something to become a habit to get changed, you could use an example of going to the gym, for example. You're not going to get that change by just going once every 2 weeks, right? It's a consistent commitment that you make to yourself. Going to do it on X number of times a week for this long. And so I think that's the first thing I would do is accepting that it's not something that you've got to make it part of your process, of your workflow. But what we tend to see, Ben, in the people who leverage conversation intelligence, call recording, is that once they have it, they quickly realize they can't live without it. And there's lots of examples of that. If I just speak for myself, I deal with fairly lengthy sales cycles in my world. They can be quite complex. They can run over a period of months. They can be, series of calls with different stakeholders. And I use it as a preparation tool. I use it to essentially help me remember and reflect on previous conversations, to help me get more prepared for future conversations, to the point that if I didn't have it now, I'd feel completely and utterly underprepared. I'd be reliant on, me making a few notes in my notepad, which make little sense the day after, never mind 2 months after. So I think that once people actually start using this type of technology, they quickly realize how was I thorough? How was I productive as a seller before I actually had this technology in my hands? So yeah, there's this kind of two things is, make make a commitment and make it part of your process if you want to get better, if you want to use it as a way of self-reflecting. But secondly, what we tend to find is that once people start using it, they very quickly realize that it's difficult to go back to the way it was.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that so much. And that's certainly true for the recruiters that I work with that have kind of embraced this. I think increasingly, right, there are opportunities to do this. So I have recruiters who have been doing Teams meetings and recording the audio to their phone. You can obviously record direct in Teams. You can there's lots of different technologies for doing it. And obviously, Refract presents a real opportunity for businesses to invest in something that will give them a lot of analysis. And within that product, within the product that you guys have built out, there are a number of kind of key features that really elevate that analysis, isn't there? I mean, I don't know whether you've got any kind of favorite elements within the product that really kind of that you find easiest to promote and dare I say sell, but what is through any of those?
Yeah, one of the big challenges that a lot of companies have is that there's lots of conversations taking place across their organization, like sales conversations every day. Even with relatively small team, you could have, 4 or 5 recruiters on a team. They're each having, multiple conversations every single day. It's not long before that kind of bank of conversations is fairly substantial. And the reality is nobody has the time to listen back to, 10 hours worth of calls every single day. So, one of the things that we do is we're able to create like playlists of highlights across a bank of conversations of things that you care about. So let's imagine, Ben, that you wanted to get an idea of, hey, I want to hear how are conversations around salaries sounding across the team today. I could literally 2 clicks and I could have, hey, here's the 10 latest calls that have taken place and the moments of those calls where the recruiter is speaking with the candidate or the client about salary expectations. And it kind of creates this, I almost describe it as like a match of the day highlight reel, so to speak, of things that you care about, extracting those moments from calls, putting it in like a playlist, making it easy to consume so that in the space of literally a few minutes, you can have a handle as to, how effective am I team at having that type of conversation? Is there someone who's more effective at it than somebody else? And if so, how can I share that with that person? Or simply, hey, I just want to get a handle as to what are the type of salaries being spoken about in the market today. We need to get a handle on that because, it's the kind of stuff that as a recruiter you have to be on top of, right? So that's just one example. The other that I'm personally a big fan on is just some of the, and this is just someone who uses to coach his own team, is that, I use some of the coaching functionality with our platform to help deliver higher impact coaching to my own salespeople, where, I can, we live in a remote world now. I'm not sat next to my colleagues in the office side by side with them every day. They're in different parts of the country. Is I can come in and I can like drop in videos on certain points of their calls to kind of coach them through certain situations that are cropping up in their calls. For example, things they may have missed or objections that they're coming up against or considerations for next calls with the same prospect. And I'm able to just drop that feedback at certain points on the call, and it creates a much more impactful experience for my team who, feel like they've got me by their side, so to speak, when they need me, despite the fact I'm, many miles away from them.
Yeah. It seems to me a real no-brainer, right? That as a sales leader or a manager with a team, particularly in a remote setting, that you'd use some kind of call analysis to listen to and understand what people are doing. And, you mentioned that piece around helping them also, that final point around helping them prepare for the next meetings or the next action. Right. We used to drop into the CRM a little code called QFNT, which is questions for next time. You come off the call and you think, damn, I wish I'd asked that, but that's okay because you're going to have a follow-up conversation. So you save that in the CRM and then you can plug that into the next conversation. The only issue is when you come away from a call and you can't think of a question that you've got to ask or you need to ask the next time. So I really love hearing about that functionality. And you mentioned earlier on in the conversation, you've analysed more sales calls than most people listening to this podcast, and possibly most people in the world, full stop, right? So one of the things that's enabled you to do, from my experience, two things actually. First, of course, we've got the absolute international best-selling Problem Prospecting, your book, with the help of your colleagues, which is an absolutely great read for everybody listening to this show. But you've also had the opportunity to produce some great LinkedIn content based off the back of the diagnostics and the analysis. And one thing I recall you mentioning was this idea about the 80-20 rule, and the fact that perhaps that split, that dialogue split between what we expect, there's this kind of hypothetical target where the prospect or the customer should be speaking 80% of the time, the salesperson should be speaking 20% of the time, particularly in a prospecting kind of call or initial conversation. And it seems from your data that perhaps that isn't quite as good a target as it might seem to be on paper.
Yeah, it gets banded around a lot, doesn't it? The 80-20 rule, and maybe gets applied to too many different things too easily, in my opinion, Ben. And if I take it in the world of sales, I've seen lots of, sales consultants, experts, however they would like to position themselves, say that, you must only be speaking 20% of the time and the prospect 80% of the time. And I actually challenge that theory, because one, that is just based on theory at the end of the day. But actually, from my own analysis of my own calls, my own team's calls, is that actually speaking for 20% of the time as a seller on a call, we find does not actually contribute to a good conversation. Normally what happens in that situation, we see this time and time again when we see calls where, I can literally go into my call library and literally filter calls where the seller was talking for 20% or less of the time. I can literally find those calls. And when I listen to those calls, the end of it, I ask the seller, I say, hey, how was that conversation for you? And they usually say, it wasn't very good. I don't think I achieved what I need to achieve on the call. And I say, what makes you say that? And they say, well, basically the prospect was just a bit of a talker. They went off on tangents. We went down rabbit holes. They gave me loads of information that really didn't answer my question or didn't help me. And they kind of leave the call with more questions than answers, quite frankly. And that does happen, right? Because you do get some chatty prospects, and that's fine. But ultimately, when you speak for 20% of the time, if you think about it in a 30-minute conversation, for example, it's actually a very short amount of time that you're talking. And when your job as a seller is to uncover information, help the prospect understand the problem that they have, why they should choose you, it typically involves speaking for more than 20% of the time. What we tend to see is that the most effective conversations, the seller is usually talking between 40 to 50% of the time. And I think balance is good. I think context is everything with this, Ben. I'm not a fan of saying, hey, the best salespeople, they speak, their talk time is 48%. I just think that's so, you can't, I just think it's such a wild claim. There's too many facets to a deal, to a sales conversation to pin it all on that. But I think there's a danger of talking too much on a call, and there's certainly a danger of not talking enough as well.
And I really hear that. It's got to be kind of situational, but it's also, from my perspective, really relevant, particularly for recruiters as well, where we are, as an industry, we should be able to bring expert insights. All salespeople, right? All professional salespeople should be able to contribute expert insights. But the difference with recruiters, most recruiters are doing a 360 role, meaning they're interacting with candidates, they're interacting with clients, they're working on jobs. So actually the information that a recruiter builds up, even in a very early stage in their career, and this takes some coaching and support for them to often believe, but very quickly in a recruiter's career, they develop insights their clients can benefit from. And if you're not taking a moment to give that context within the questions that you ask, you're also maybe missing opportunities to draw the client into you a little bit more too.
100%. I think, we've no prospect is sat there as going on a sales call just wanting to just be asked a ton of questions by a seller, because ultimately, what did they get out of that call? They're committing time to speak with a salesperson, and if all they're doing is just answering questions that it's all on your agenda, you've got to give that prospect something that they will perceive as valuable back in the call, and that's insights, it's sharing about success stories, challenges that similar people are having in the industry, trends. You want to make that prospect feel like, if at the very least at the end of that call, if they feel like they're not a good fit for you right now, at least they've got something from that call. Make it memorable. Make yourself be someone that they will consider wanting to working with down the line, or someone that they can refer or recommend. So it's definitely a very pertinent point.
Yeah. I really love the content that you're sharing here, and thinking about those conversations.
Standing out in your sector is becoming harder than ever. Lots of people are making noise, saturating the market with the same old droll tones. So if you want to stand out, it's time to start a podcast. Yes, there's loads of podcasts out there, but how many of them are actually in your niche? Do any of them speak to your perspective on the market? I didn't think so. Podcasting not only sets you apart as an innovative thinker in your market, it is great content for repurposing. Here at SearchStat, we help you become the voice of your industry. We can stretch your content and turn it into a content goldmine, leveling up your personal brands and recruitment marketing in the process. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, to find out more, head over to searchstat.co.uk/podcasts.
As I mentioned before, you wrote the book Problem Prospecting with Mark and Stuart. And as we think about how recruiters have those conversations and share insights and share context around the questions that they ask and the way they lead conversations, clearly problems, i.e. the problems that recruiters solve, take a real fundamental kind of pride of place within those conversations. And I see the recruiters often kind of miss the mark with the problems that they talk about. My kind of position on this is that very often the vacancy that your client is looking to fill, or the vacancy you want to fill on their behalf, isn't really the real problem, and that actually there's something more at play. But rather than go down that route that this audience will have heard me talk about before, what I'd really like to ask you is about the role that you see problems playing in sales conversations. Why are problems so fundamental in the way that we conduct effective prospecting or sales conversation?
Yeah, it's a lesson that I learned, and I think it's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in sales, is that people react and respond and are emotional to problems. You always relate it back to your personal life. It's why newspapers have so much success at having clickbait headlines. They'll put a massive, big problem on the front of the newspaper. Why? It's to make you stop, turn your head. Should I buy that newspaper, or should I click on that article? Right? It's people who use social media, you'll see these adverts popping up that just entice you wanting to click, and a lot of the time it's you'll see it's problem driven. It's problems make people emotional. People buy based on emotion a lot of the time. And the reality is that nobody is waking up one morning and thinking, you know what, I really need a conversation intelligence platform or a sales enablement platform in my life. Nobody is waking up and thinking of those things in their head. What they are waking up and thinking about is, man, I'm super stressed because my sales team aren't performing, or that I'm going to miss my number this quarter, or, hey, we've got a revenue gap to close, or in the recruitment world, let's imagine you're hiring for a new head of marketing. It's like, man, I need someone in place because I'm concerned that it's going to be 3 months before we generate an effective lead flow, and that's going to impact on performance, right?
And actually, if we take that out a step, right, and we'll come back to let you finish that point in a moment, but if we take that out a step, the conversations I have with recruiters are less about, okay, why is the client worried about, why is the employer worried about this particular hire, but what does it mean for that business that they don't have a process that they can really trust to deliver them the right people on time, in budget, when they need them most?
Right.
How concerned is the CEO or the C-suite kind of stakeholder that when they go to market to find somebody to fill a role, they either overspend, wait too long, or get somebody who isn't good enough, and they do that consistently. So that's where maybe we think about the 10 million problem in recruitment.
And that's what's going through the prospect's head every single day. And that's why when you are in sales, you have to, first of all, understand the problems that your prospects are likely facing. And you have to get your prospect hooked into a conversation by making them react to problems that, you solve, that they will care about. The product comes afterwards, the features and benefits, the person, whoever, that all comes afterwards. But, I get approached by recruiters a lot. Like, let's say I get cold emails, and it'll say, "Hey Rich, I've got a great candidate. He's got 6 years experience. He's got this, he's got that." And like, none of that is making me go, I need to respond to this person. It's not problem led. It's like, I'm not waking in the morning thinking I need a candidate with 6 years experience who achieved this and got this award and all the rest of it. And so I want people to think about that, is that if you can lead with problems that your company solves, think of like all you want is the prospect to say, yeah, I've got that problem. How do you solve it? What's the solution? Then that's when you can position your solution.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you say that. I think as I've gone through this podcast and interviewed more and more business leaders from outside of the recruitment industry, we hear the same thing over and over again. We hear that the fact that recruiters are going out with a message that is is typically tailored around their product and less so around the problems that organizations and business leaders really worry about. And you also mentioned that emotion, how emotional can people get about the potential of being sent a CV versus a bigger problem that sits right at the core of their organization? So do you typically focus on emotions then when you think about how your team sell and build conversations with clients?
Yeah, I'd say so. When if you peel it back, then that's ultimately what you're trying to uncover is this a problem? First of all, does the prospect have a problem? Secondly, how big is that problem? Thirdly, like, what have they done to try and address that problem to date, right? Because if they haven't done anything to address it, maybe it's not really that big enough problem. It's a problem that they've been happy to live with. But the next one is so key as to why would they want to solve that problem now? And the answer to that question often comes back to their own personal situation, their personal motivations in the business. And it often comes with an element of, risk, personal risk that they have, or less so, but definitely a factor is personal reward. But more people are likely to buy something based on reducing risk than gain. So yeah, we have this now a discovery kind of framework. When we speak with a new prospect, we're trying to get the answers to those questions. And if we figure out that someone doesn't face that problem, it's not a big enough problem, they're not that motivated to solve it now, then they're likely to not be very emotional about it, quite frankly. And your time is probably best spent finding someone who will be.
And I think, again, when we think about the lessons that recruiters can take from what I tongue-in-cheek asked as or framed as proper salespeople earlier, is perhaps that point that you landed on there, which seems to suggest that actually your team are walking away from opportunities where there isn't enough emotion, or there isn't enough sort of need to change, or the timing isn't, right. It's not a case of changing right now.
Yeah, I'd say not enough. They do that. They don't do it enough. There's times when I listen to calls and I'm like, hey, I don't think that prospect's motivated, hence why, since you had the call with them 2 weeks ago, nothing's happened. It's stuck in the pipeline, right? But it takes bravery to do that as a seller. But I always remember that this one quote, I can't remember who said this to me years ago, but it's stuck with me ever since, is the key to sales is spend more time speaking with people who want to buy your stuff. And it sounds so simplistic, but actually, it's so, I always kind of remind myself of that quote every so often, because it's so key. Like, you can't, life's too short to be trying to convince and persuade and batter someone over the head to somebody who really isn't that motivated to buy your stuff right now. And so yeah, part of your job as a seller, and I'll include recruiters within that, is to make sure that you spend the right time with the right people and less time with the wrong people.
Yeah. It's a great quote, right? And it's so simple, but it's absolutely so true. I've got Todd Capone coming on the show in a few weeks, who wrote The Transparency Sale and The Transparent Sales Leader. And he was on a webinar recently that I saw, talking about this idea of, instead of having a funnel shape for sales, we might think about a sales process being more like a nail. So at the top of the process, we've got this really broad piece, lots and lots of discovery, lots and lots of hard questions, lots and lots of no's, but only a few people to take the next step in our process. But the people who do get all the way through to closing. Right. So actually, instead of losing a similar number of people at each stage, you're actually losing 99% of your people at your prospecting conversation or your first stage conversation, and the remaining 1% go all the way through the process. I actually think there's an application for this for recruiters when they think about their candidate selection strategy, which is to say to their clients, look, I'm going to present you with 3 CVs, and I expect you to take all 3 of those candidates through all 3 stages of your interview process, because the first candidate might be a little bit nervous or screw up an answer in the first interview that might throw them off. We know that, particularly over Zoom, that's incredibly possible. But who's to say they wouldn't come back in the second interview and knock it out of the park? I'm presenting you with 3 candidates who represent the very best talent in the market, based on me reviewing over 100 CVs and speaking to 30 initial people. What I'm recommending is you don't rule them out too soon, and you have 2 stages of conversation before you come to that final decision. I think that's a really compelling proposition, but and perhaps something for recruiters to consider. But as you say, kind of disqualifying hard at the top of the funnel is always a really tricky thing to do. We want to keep people in our funnel, don't we?
I think you build respect with your prospects and clients when you have that approach of saying like I'm only going to take you on this journey with me if I genuinely believe that I can help you. And if I speak of that in a recruitment world as saying, like, I'm gonna make sure that the people that you will get to see, I'm confident that they're gonna be the right fit for you, and you're gonna just have to choose, which one. But what I'm not gonna do is just sling CV after CV at you, just hoping that something's gonna stick. I think you build respect when you say, like, listen, there's a whole process I've gone through to get to these people, and that's why I'm so, like, I know that the right fit. Even that, I think you would stand out because you build that respect with your customers that, hey, can see that you're different from the rest.
Yeah, it's absolutely something I think recruiters should be baking into their process. It also relies on having a really good briefing process, and I think that's where, again, professional sales skills really kind of relates. Most recruiters, right, don't have a discovery phase in their process, but they do have that when they're thinking about taking job briefs from clients. So I'd love to do some more work, perhaps even have a further conversation with you about the discovery process itself and really thinking about how recruiters can learn from that. But look, while we're talking about what recruiters can learn from real salespeople, what they can learn from call analysis as well, I'd like to get your thought on this particular perspective, right? So you run a sales team and you listen to lots of sales calls. I wonder why it is that you think perhaps product knowledge is less foundational or important than perhaps a knowledge of the sales process or a knowledge of how to sell well might be.
Yeah, and I'll definitely preface this to say that having strong product knowledge does help, because when you've got strong product knowledge, it enables you to, I think, enhance the prospect experience in the buying cycle. You know, you're not being asked questions and answering with, I'm not sure about that, let me get back to you. And, I think when you've got strong product knowledge, especially in a competitive world, it allows you to promote certain aspects of your product that will be valuable for your prospect compared to what they will get with your competition. So it's, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be seen as a person who kind of just says, "Oh, you don't need to have product knowledge to be successful." I actually think you do, and probably in some industries more than others. Quite frankly. But I know in my own organization, there's people with that would say they haven't got that strong product knowledge, and I'll see that, but they're very successful because they spend time understanding the end goal of the prospect, saying, "Hey, when I come to demo my product to you, I'm only going to show you literally the 20% of my product that I think is going to solve your problems," which is hard for a lot of people, especially in the world of software sales, is that they want to show off every fancy button and functionality and differentiator under the sun, right? They want to. I kind of describe it in the software world as it's like a harbor tour where you get the passengers on your boat and you take them on the harbor tour, show off all the attractions, and no matter what time of the day or day of the week you go on that harbor tour, you're seeing the same things. And the best salespeople are the ones who actually understand, hey, I understand the problem that you've got, what you're trying to get to, and I'm going to show you that maybe the 20% of our product that's going to show you how to solve those things. So in that regard, you don't have to have this all-encompassing knowledge of your product. You just need to know what to show, but that all depends on your ability to understand the prospect's problem. And I think that when it comes to buying and selling, trust is key, right? People don't buy from people they like. People buy from people that they trust. And I think trust is built up by listening, by showing that you understand your prospect's world, that you go on a sales call and the next sales call, it's almost like you've never spoken before, that they haven't repeat themselves, that they feel like you didn't listen last time around. And that's what, good discovery is all about, building trust, because you're trying to understand their world. So that for me is always much more important than, hey, I've got really strong product knowledge. And I'll say another thing as well is that if to be successful in sales, you had to have strong product knowledge, then most sellers would probably be smashing it out the park, right? Because most people are intelligent, most people can understand the product, most people could sit down and do a 100 question test on their product, and they'd probably score pretty highly, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make money and you're going to be successful selling it.
I think that reflects back, as you were mentioning that, kind of thinking back to this idea that recruiters are out there taking their candidates to market and saying, hey, I've got this person who can do X, Y, and Z. And you mentioned that typically doesn't resonate with you, or lots of those messages typically don't resonate with you. And that's a very common piece of feedback that I hear from leaders from outside the recruitment industry. And I think it speaks to that very point, doesn't it? That we're taking candidates out to market. We're sharing details about profiles without really having any understanding of how that's going to solve the issue that sits at the heart of our target client or prospect or the person we want to do business with, their concerns. it's a really interesting thing. You also mentioned that, discovery is where you build trust. And I think the fastest route that I've seen to build trust in relationships is by asking great quality questions. Where recruiters don't do discovery, or for any recruiter who feels like they don't have a real discovery phase in their process, but also feels that they perhaps don't have the same level of trust in their relationships, there may be a connection there that they can draw. And certainly later in the series, I'm going to be doing an episode specifically around discovery meetings and how recruiters can use those to build trust with prospects, with target clients as part of their sales journey.
Yeah.
Rich, you've been an awesome guest. You've shared loads of great ideas for recruiters and thinking about the way that they might approach sales. We've talked a little bit there around kind of call analysis and thinking about how recruiters can improve their processes too. Is there anything else that you would like to share that we haven't touched on, or you think is important for recruiters to think about before we end the show?
Yeah, I think I'll come back to my point at the start of is that recruitment is just one flavor of sales. Be proud of that. Be proud that you're in sales. But if you want to be proud about the profession, then you have to take pride in developing yourself. And, that's why I think people like yourself, Ben, who are out there trying to help develop recruiters is so important. But for people to develop themselves, right? Selling is definitely getting harder and harder. That's one thing I'm noticing, and especially in the current climate, right? And the economy will be impacting on the recruitment sector, and like it is on many other sectors. And so, when that happens, your products don't necessarily get any better. You don't suddenly have a birth of much better candidates at your disposal. In some cases, you might have less. But one thing that is in your control is to improve the effectiveness of your sales skills, behaviors, process. And so, yeah, that's why it's. I think that's what everybody should be doing. The best salespeople are the ones that invest in their own development. And spend some more money with Ben is my advice.
And can I throw that back to you as well, Rich? I appreciate it, but you know what? Right now, the reason I really wanted to get you on this show, the reason I really wanted to have this conversation is recruitment is sales, and recruiters are proper salespeople. And the way that proper salespeople can develop and grow, as you say, is in no small part driven by self-reflection and analyzing what they do. And if you're a recruiter listening to this and you're not spending time each week listening to your calls, listening to your colleagues' calls, then start getting that into your process as soon as possible. That's a really strong recommendation. And if you're a business leader listening to this, and you're not sure how to go about that, you're not sure whether you've got a platform or a system that's going to enable you to do that, reach out to Rich and have a conversation with him or someone on his team about what Refract can do for your business. Because Rich is absolutely right. It's only getting tougher, and products like Refract, the ability to analyze and think about the way you sell, will be a huge differentiator in what's coming. So, Rich, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all that with us. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Cheers, Ben. Thanks very much.
No worries.